So, just a few days ago, after 50 years of government-sponsored eugenics called abortion, made mandatory legal by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has finally reversed their decision, and now people are going apeshit because there will be a few states where they will not be able to get an abortion. Well, maybe half the states in the United States. And of course this is going to cause a great schism, a great division in the United States of America. And I for a long time had been suspect of the term the United States. For a long time I prefer to call it the divided states of America. And it is getting even more divided day by day. In fact, there was an insurrection, a January 6th type of insurrection that happened in Arizona as a result. But you Christians, you started this. And I'm going to prove it today that you started it. So I have outlined here my little notes. Christians, you set this up. Christians invented Darwinism before Darwin came along. You want some proof? I'll show you some proof. Let's get started. So in this article on biologos.org / common questions / how have Christians responded to Darwin's Origin of Species. Even before Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, many Christians had already accepted an old Earth. One of the first supporters of evolutionary science in America, Harvard biologist Asa Gray, was a devout Christian. Conservative theologian B.B. Warfield also accepted the science of evolution. Both he and Asa Gray rejected the idea that evolution leads to atheism. This was back in the mid-1800s, folks. Even the authors of the fundamentals published between 1910 and 1915 accepted an old Earth, as in millions of years old, as opposed to thousands of years old. It wasn't until a century after Darwin that a large number of evangelicals and fundamentalists began to accept the combination of flood geology and six-day creation promoted by the Seventh-day Adventists. Introduction. Many believe that before Darwin published the Origin of Species in 1859, Christians as a whole maintain an entirely literal six-day interpretation of Genesis, in which the earth was only a few thousand years old. In fact, however, the idea of an old earth had already become increasingly popular among Christians throughout the half-century leading up to the Origin of Species. Another misconception is that the arrival of Darwin's theory led the scientific and theological communities to immediately take up positions opposing each other. But history reveals that one of the earliest supporters of evolutionary theory in the American scientific community was a devout Christian botanist named Asa Gray, and among theologians B.B. Warfield, an architect of the contemporary evangelical understanding of biblical inerrancy, believed that certain forms of evolution were also compatible with a high view of Scripture. Darwin did not invent the idea of evolution. By the time The Origin of Species was published, the idea of evolution and many natural processes was already popular, and the term development was used in its place for discussions of society's change or the history of our solar system. What's more, it was widely accepted that the Earth was much older than previously thought. Most of the groundwork for this understanding resulted from geological work done earlier that century. Through meticulous study of fossil record, naturalists helped spread the view that the Earth was old rather than young. And I would like to mention the fact that they were claiming that dinosaur bones were 50 some odd 100 millions of years old, when in fact, and I did several videos on this years ago, The Adventures of Marco Polo, in his writings, he made note of what they call dinosaurs today still living in Khorasan, which is Eastern Persia, Pakistan, and India. And he also had seen them in China. And the reason why they were wiped out is because they were good eating, as they say. But I digress. Though many people like to focus on Christian hostility to evolutionary theory, a careful look at history reveals some surprising facts. For instance, the first American scientist to carefully review, publicly support Darwin's Origin of Species was a devout Christian named Asa Gray, now regarded as one of the most prominent American biologists of the 19th century. A shy person who avoided politics, Gray worked quietly and does not have the same recognition as scientists like Louis Agassiz and T.H. Huxley, both flamboyant self-promoters who provoke public debate. But his brilliant research, brilliant, I put in quotations, during his 30-year career at Harvard University helped usher in the era of modern biology in the United States. Asa Gray made his commitment to Christ in 1835, a few years after completing medical school, much like Francis Collins of our own era. As a professing Christian, Gray was committed to church-going and a member of the local congregation in Cambridge, Massachusetts. As a professional scientist, he insisted that scientists were neutral in matters of religion and metaphysics. Gray found evolutionary theory incredibly stimulating in his scientific research, but never found it threatening to his faith. Yes, this man spoke out of both sides of his mouth and didn't think anything of it. Both before and after reading Origin of Species, Gray remained firmly grounded in the Nicene Creed, a profession of faith that Christians have shared since the early church. And I tell you, and I'm being nice about this, I'm being gracious when I say that after the Nicene Creed, the whole of Christianity had gone astray. But I'm here to tell you that they were already going astray, and they weren't even called Christians in Paul's time, and they were already gone astray. What happened when Origin of Species burst onto the scene? Gray's extensive research on American and Japanese plants, in which he published after corresponding with Charles Darwin, had already convinced him that species and genera found in both countries resulted from common ancestry, not separate creations. He responded to Darwin's book by writing the first major review of origin of his side of the Atlantic, and he defended Darwin's scientific theory in a series of meetings of American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1859 and 1860. Gray was determined that Origin would get a fair reading from the scientific community, and he even took a leading role in negotiating to reprint Origin in the United States, and in 1860 ensuring that Americans could have the most accurate edition in their hands. Yes, a devout, conservative Christian was pushing Darwinism as hard and fast as he could go. Regarding the theological implications of evolution, Gray believed that Darwin's theory was not atheistic, although he recognized that some would use it as an excuse for unbelief. Henceforth, he concluded, we need to reshape the argument, to remold the narrative. That's what it really meant to say. To remold the narrative from design in such wise as to harmonize our ineradicable belief in design with the fundamental scientific belief of continuity in nature. Just because a plant can have a subspecies, they think that's evolution. Just because there are different species of bovine, they think that's by evolution over millions and millions of years ago. Well, that's foolhardy. Today in my garden, I'm growing new subspecies of squash. I'm also growing new subspecies of peppers. I have second and third generation subspecies of peppers growing in my garden right now. Peppers that are actually a cross between a jalapeno and a poblano of sorts. They're looking good too. Some are variegated. See, I'm not coming to you with lack of understanding of how this works. Henceforth, he concluded we need to reshape the argument from design, etc., etc., to harmonize our ineradicable belief in design. And how long did it take for them to eradicate belief in design and brainwash all the school children with evolution? How long did that take? And using that as a stepping stone to more evil. These are Christians who did this. He says the question of whether or not life evolves should not be confused with the issues of God's existence. And of course, they, in this case, also remolded the narrative. They changed the name of Jehovah to the name of their false idol that they worshiped beforehand. Like A sow goes back to her own slop, and like a dog goes back to their own vomit. Anyway. So, early theological concerns with evolution. In the decades of after Origin of Species was published, theologians began to ponder the compatibility of Darwin's theory and Christian doctrine. Some of them adopted Gray's views that evolution was God's method of creation. Others argued that since Darwin explained away the apparent design of nature, it was compatible only to atheism. Some scholars accepted Darwin's argument for common ancestry but rejected the idea of natural selection, either for scientific, philosophical, or theological reasons. Others resisted evolution specifically for the human species, partly due to the concerns that evolution could conflict with Christian claims that human beings are created in the image of God. They should have said Jehovah, not God. But with time, however, even some of the more conservative theologians became comfortable with evolution. B.B. Warfield, for instance, developed a powerful and enduring legacy in American evangelicalism with his belief that the Bible communicates revelation from God entirely without error. Well, as I have proven to you, the King James Version is full of error. These people are blind as bats, and they love it. Yet he defended biblical inerrancy. Warfield was also a cautious proponent of the possibility that God could have brought about life through evolution. Then how does that explain that he made man with his hands in less than a day out of the dirt in the ground? And once he was finished, he blew into the nostrils of the man so that he would have life into him. This is what Christians do. What is the term that they use? They gaslight you. That's the term that they use today. They pretend to believe both when you can't. It's impossible. Man cannot have two masters, the Creator or evolution. And yet Christians today still believe that they can. Look, I have a former friend now because I think because of some of the posts that I have put on Facebook, he has unfriended me, as you say. He's a Catholic because his wife is a Catholic, and he believes in what do you call that? Evolution. You see, these Christians, they want to have an appearance of piety, religiousness. They want to project it. They want to. What are the terms that they use today? I need to get back here. The term that they use today is virtue signaling. That's it. So you Christians, you talk about virtue signaling. Who is the author of virtue signaling? You Christians. And right here under B, I see only when, but you saw that, only when Seventh-day Adventists call out the other Christians with the 6,000-year timeline did some eugenics embraced by Christians. And then I want to go to the Urbana Theological Seminary. I think that's where, or was it where I was? Let's go look. I think I'm done with this one anyway. Oh yeah, this is where, although many Christians were concerned about the implications they found in Darwin's theory of evolution, by the end of the 19th century, very few Christian authors argued for a young Earth. Enthusiasm for this was largely confined to the Seventh-day Adventists who, following the writings of their founding prophet Ellen G. White, and there is no such thing as a prophet by the name of Ellen G. White. She was a fake and a fraud too. She claimed to have seen creation of the earth in a vision from, as she said, God. In another vision, she said God revealed to her Noah's flood produced a fossil. Well, anyone with any sense by now can realize that a fossil can produce in a matter of a short period of time. Now, and early Adventists thus explained the geological data found in their early 19th century with their interpretation of the flood story of Genesis 6 through 8. Alright. And indeed, the flood did fossilize a lot of things that were before the flood. But anyway, let's continue. Let's go to the next article. Eugenics and Christianity. See, what happened with the Christian embrace of Darwinism even before Charles Darwin was even born had already started, which led to this, eugenics. Written by David Schutte, graduate certificate of Christian Studies student. This past January, I became enthralled with the potential connection between eugenics and Christianity when I watched Ben Stein's documentary. Ben Stein, a Jew. It takes a Jew to point these things out. In Academic Freedom entitled Expelled. At the time, I was registered to take CH 502 History of World Christianity 2. Dr. Joe Thomas was teaching the class and graciously allowed me to entertain my curiosity about any connection between eugenics and Christianity. The result was an extensive research paper that led me down a deep rabbit trail, producing fascinating answers and still more fascinating questions. The word eugenics comes from the Greek word eugenes, which means well-born. In the name of that one word, families would be torn apart. Fundamental human rights would be trampled on, and whole nations would be energized to prevent the unfit from continuing either by segregation, sterilization, or mass murder. How such terrible consequences could come about from one simple word as a witness to the truth of the adage, ideas have consequences, and in this case the consequences were intentional. In the 1860s, the mathematician Francis J. Galton, 1822 to 1911, his love of observing patterns led him to the conclusion that through time, many accomplished, talented, or otherwise noteworthy people were descended from the same families. Galton, who practically invented both fingerprinting and meteorology. Beware of both, folks. Considered himself to be a member of one of these prestigious families. After all, the eminent naturalist Charles Darwin was his cousin. See, I'm showing you the stepping stones that led to the situation that we are in today. It started from Christianity, folks. A Christian came up with this idea first for publication, and then Charles Darwin came later and wrote a nice book, and this Christian, this God-fearing Nicene Christian, published Charles Darwin's books and spread them worldwide. Christians were believing this nonsense even before Charles Darwin's benefactor. Believing that greatness runs in families, Galton proposed that qualities such as intelligence, strength, and even moral uprightness were heritable. How then do they explain Jacob and Esau? Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Came from the same mother and came from the same father. Let's continue. Galton proposed that qualities such as intelligence, strength, and even moral uprightness were heritable. Thus, the basic idea of eugenics was born. The concept that it is possible to improve the intellectual, physical, and moral state of the human race by only allowing the most fit individuals to procreate. Encouraging fit individuals to reproduce is called positive eugenics, whereas discouraging unfit individuals from reproducing is called negative eugenics. Well, what has been going on for 50 years is negative eugenics. Made mandatory the abortion being made mandatory, and most abortion clinics were in minority locations. You can look up the demographics of abortions in the United States of America, and you can see clearly that the minorities were the majority of abortions, and that was by design. Eugenics, folks, alive and well in the United States, a Christian nation. Many of the destructive practices that would later result in the selective breeding program Galton proposed stemming from the negative half of the movement, the eugenics movement. The United States pursued eugenics with fervor. Ultimately, many countless numbers of people from inferior nations such as those in Southern and Eastern Europe would be banned from coming to the U.S. through eugenics and anti-eugenic, anti-immigration legislation. Worse yet, some 60,000 U.S. citizens deemed unfit would be forcibly sterilized. Many of them were poor children, abandoned or otherwise undercared for by their parents. Forced sterilization was a eugenics practice made legal by the tragic 1927 Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell. One cannot help but well up with tears while reading accounts of those who were prevented from having children. One sterilized Virginia man smiled through his tears as he read a greeting card from his stepchild. "They called me Daddy." A woman sterilized without her knowledge of the procedure wept as she explained to reporters how her husband divorced her because of many years of fruitless attempts at childbearing. Eugenics had strong ties to religion, specifically Christianity. Here we go again. Ever since its advent in the late 19th century, Galton realized that tremendous sacrifices required of individuals by voluntarily participating in a eugenics program would only be possible through fervent devotion to eugenics as a civil religion. And it's still, even though the Supreme Court struck it down, it is still a civil religion, a religion that is going to divide this country and cause a civil war, possibly like the world has never seen. Religious leaders would indeed provide their support to Galton's race-improving movement, sometimes even laying aside their pulpit duties to take up leadership roles in societies like the Eugenics Record Office of, or the American Eugenics Society. Overwhelmingly, the largest section of religious support for eugenics came from the liberal modernist wings of all Catholic, Protestant, and even Jewish denominations in early 20th century America. Yes, and as I pointed out when I pointed out this particular article, which everyone should read, The Horrifying American Roots of Nazi Eugenics, Edwin Black points out it was the progressives who pushed it the hardest. And that's the reason why you see progressives talking about civil war, talking about hunting down conservatives where they live in rural areas. Yes, they are doing that. Because Roe versus Wade got overturned. Folks, there is no way. I do not have time to go through all the articles and literature and proofs that I have of this. I'm going to give you some, and you need to do your own homework. Yes, overwhelmingly, the largest section of religious support for eugenics came from the liberals, the progressives, wings of all Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish denominations in the early 20th century. During the same period, conservative Christians tended to oppose the eugenics movement, yet unfortunately they did little. They did little in the way of fighting against eugenics. Years before the Nazis put eugenics into devastating practice, those few Christians who did speak out against the race-improving movement became prophetic in their denunciations. The average person knows very little about America's involvement with eugenics, although eugenics has been getting media attention lately. CNN recently covered North Carolina. This is an older article, I do believe, about proposed reparations of victims of forced sterilization. The reason for a lack of knowledge concerning eugenics seems to be due to the fact that very few high school curricula cover the topic. And I'll tell you the reason why they don't want to cover the topic is because they will inevitably find the connection between evolution that they teach as the curricula religion and eugenics. You cannot have one without the other. So they will teach their religion of evolution and drop the history of eugenics. Alright, I think this is just about done, so I've had enough of that one. Now, as I said, if you please read this article, you see it right here, type it down now, freeze the video, type it down, and read the whole thing, and you will see that the number one idol of the Democrat Party, Margaret Sanger, a gleeful eugenicist, or eugenist, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Carnegie Institute, and the Harriman Railroad fortune, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. They all were guilty. They all had their hand in eugenics and ultimately the murder of 6 million Jews in Germany, Nazi Germany, in Europe, and also others. You will see it here. And the idea of gas chambers came first in the United States of America, folks. Most commonly suggested method of eugenicide in America was a lethal chamber or public locally operated gas chambers. They were going to do that right here in the United States of America. Like I said, this is way too much. But please read all of these articles that I posted and realize that this government today, that parts of this government today, the executive branch and the congressional branch still want this eugenics program. They're going to fight for it. The devil is not going to just give up part of his religion, infanticide. All right. And this duality, this double talk, this double-mindedness. It is written that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, has led to this. You see? And why has the United States government been pushing same-sex civil unions and the fraud of transgenderism? It is to continue by other means the idea of eugenics, population control. And this is the reason why the head of Christianity today, or the head of Western Christianity today, endorses this. Well, what does Paul have to say about this? 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 9. Don't you know that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim, not God? Be not deceived, neither fornicator. What does that word mean? So we need to look at these words carefully. A fornicator, a man who prostitutes himself. And that's typical of these transgender frauds. That's what they do. Nor idolaters, an image worshiper, which all Christian or nearly all Christian denominations do. They have their cross, they have an image, and they bow down to it and worship on Sunday or on Easter. Nor idolaters, nor is a man who is guilty with a married woman. Now, there's a caveat to this, folks. Nor effeminate, soft people. Soft. That's just merely soft. Cushy. People who don't know how to work. That covers a lot of people, folks. Nor arsenokoites. Alright, male engaging in same-gender sexual activity. Nor thieves, well, that would be most of government officials. Nor covetous, that would also be most of government officials. Nor drunkards, that would be also most of government officials. Nor revilers or abusers, railers. Once again, many of them are government officials, extortioners, rapacious, definitely government officials, shall inherit the kingdom of Elohim. As such were some of you. But you are now washed and you are now sanctified, but you are sanctified not in the name of the Lord Jesus, no. In the name of Yehoshua. See, Jesus cannot sanctify you. If you're going to live the lie and say that Jesus is the same as Yehoshua, you are free to do so if you want to, but recognize the consequences of not recognizing the name Yehoshua, because that is the name that washes us, you and me, from all of these sins that were just named. And if you're going to choose the wrong name, you are not washed and you are not sanctified. Okay? And by the Ruach of Elohim. Now, so some of you have been asking why I'm wearing this yellow star. Some get offended by it, some Jews get offended by it, and Christians get offended by it. Well, if it's offending people, then it's probably a good thing that I'm wearing it. Holocaust Encyclopedia. Origins of the badge. Oh, let's start with this. Number 1, decrees ordering, identifying badges were rarely isolated acts. They were often part of a series of anti-Jewish measures designed to segregate Jews from the rest of the population and reinforce their inferior status. I will not stand with a population that calls the other part of the population inferior. So I will stand with those who were considered inferior. So to my Jewish brothers, please do not be offended by this and start asking me what my ancestry is. I have Jewish ancestry. On my mother's side, too. my Rabbi Yehoshua is a Jew. He was also treated as a inferior by the Romans. Now, with the coming of the French Revolution in the 18th century and the Jewish emancipation in the 19th century, the Jewish badge disappeared in Western Europe, that is, until the Shoah, when Nazi officials implemented the Jewish badge between 1939 and 1945. They did so in an intensified, systematic manner as a prelude to deporting Jews to ghettos and killing centers in German-occupied Eastern Europe. Now, I don't just wear this for the sake to stand with the victims of the Shoah. Not just for them, but for all who were deemed second-class citizens and were forced to wear a badge. I do this in my video, in all of my videos, to show you where I stand. Now you know. So don't be bitching and complaining to me on one side, saying, how dare you wear that, my ancestors wore that. Well, I stand with your ancestors. And on the other side, claiming that it's the Star of Remphan, when in fact you Christians worship the Saturn star, the 8-pointed Saturn star, the star of Ishtar, the star of Chian. You Christians, that is your star. This right here, it is two Phoenician Dalits. And I'm not for or against this star necessarily. It's Dalits as initials of D, as in David. I wear this in honor of and remembrance of every Jew who was declared an inferior species of the human race. I stand with them. Because when Judgment Day comes, all who were exalted shall be abased, and those who were abased shall be exalted. I think I'll go to that one, and I think I'll be finished. For everyone who exalts himself is going to be humbled. I don't like that version. Let's try. For whosoever exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. So those who were humbled, the Jews, I stand with them. I do not stand with those who did not, or who were not forced to wear the yellow star. I do not stand with those who exalted themselves over the Jews. In no way, shape, or form. You'll never, ever, ever hear me call myself a Christian for that very reason. And also, the other reason is because Jesus Christos was a foreign idol, having nothing to do with Yehoshua, the Moshiach of Israel.